You put snot on the ball?
Haven't got an arm like yours. I got to put anything on it I can find. Someday you will too.
It's Polar Opposites with Craig Moffitt. I mean, this guy's a Mets fan. And Matt Stevens. And this guy's a Yankees fan?
They make terrific pair. They went together like lamb and tuna fish.
Lamb and tuna fish?
Polar Opposites. Only on Sports on the Go One Radio Network.
Welcome back to the Polar Opposites Radio Show, only on Sports on the Go One Radio. The number to call, as always, is 631-676-2968, 631-676-2968. I am Craig Moffitt. Matt is off as usual on Wednesday, but Chad DeCarlo's here as well. And right about now, are we ready? All right, right now, back for a second time on our show, we have Tim Healey, Mets beat writer for Newsday. Tim, thank you for taking the time again to be on our show tonight.
Anytime. Thank you, guys.
Tim, I have to ask this question. Why can't this team hit?
That's a good question.
It's literally depressing now. Like it's gotten past depressing.
It's bewildering. It really is, because even when teams, every team and every player will go through their slumps. They'll go through hot stretches, cold stretches. This is an amazingly cold stretch they're going through. They lose back-to-back games to the worst team in baseball, and the Orioles score just one run is honestly dumbfounding. So I don't have any answers, and I don't think the Mets do either right now.
I mean, like, it just watching, and then, like, today, Cabrera, who's one of our best hitters, is bunting, and he pops up a bunt, and it just that's when you just kind of you get to see, like, when it rains, it literally pours. And the thing is, the Mets are a team that they could barely survive, like, a minor rainstorm, let alone a hurricane.
Right.
So with the way the roster's built, because this team literally has no margin for error.
Right. As we've seen, because the depth just isn't there, they're not good enough to play bad baseball and still win.
Now, Tim, you were there, I'm guessing, for the Mickey Callaway presser afterwards. Did he say that he called for that bunt?
Mickey Callaway very awkwardly avoided answering the question about whose decision the bunt was. Steve Gels of SNY did a good job of pressing and trying to get Callaway to clarify a couple of times, and Callaway simply didn't. But then Cabrera afterward acknowledged that it was his call, not the bench's call.
Oh.
So I guess Callaway might have been trying to protect his player a little bit for what comes off as a really silly decision in a critical moment. So, it's hard to knock Callaway too much for that one if he's just trying to protect his guy, but it doesn't change the fact that it was a bizarre decision and, in my opinion, the wrong decision.
Tim, why isn't Jay Bruce on the DL at this point? Because this seems like this plantar fasciitis it's bugging him all year, and I understand that Cespedes was on the DL, and I mean the Mets just lost a couple of guys, but I mean I just think having him, while Jay Bruce is not the most elite hitter in the world, just the fact that this has been, you could tell it's just a nagging injury that's going to be affecting him all year. Shouldn't the Mets have put him on the DL sooner, like maybe a little earlier in the season?
You could say that, but in theory, when this has been going on since even before the start of spring training, this plantar fasciitis for Bruce, and popped up again in spring. He had to miss a couple days, was a problem again in April, I believe. So this is a problem that has continued to be managed by the Mets and by Jay Bruce, and it'll stay that way for really all season and perhaps beyond. So I don't know that a DL stint is really going to fix the problem. 10 days, 20 days, however long it's going to be, unless you plan on having Bruce out for an extended period, maybe having the surgery to fix it. Having him sit out for a little while to rest isn't really going to fix that problem. And then, with Cespedes out for several weeks now, Jay Bruce, as bad as he's been, on paper you still want his power in the lineup, even though that hasn't yielded any results lately.
My other question is, I've noticed this too, because before every game, I always see the lineups posted, and it never seems like Mickey Callaway stays with the same lineup. He's always kind of juggling around multiple players. There was one game where I saw Kevin Plawecki was batting cleanup.
Right.
Why can't Callaway just, and then, again, like, I know it's injuries and I know it's part of the reason, but why does it seem like Callaway just cannot stay with a same lineup or just like maybe tweak it one guy here? But it seems like everybody just keeps getting rearranged into different positions every single night.
Right. Well, a lot of it, you're right, is because of all the moving parts. Not only the injuries, but the fill-ins, third base, for example. They've cycled through a bunch of different guys for the time that Frazier was out. But also, I think having a consistent lineup, 1 through 7, 1 through 8, 1 through 9, is a thing of the past because teams are, including the Mets, rely so heavily on data and matchups and what makes sense against that night's starting pitcher. Now, Callaway's preference, his stated preference, is to leave certain guys in the same spot when possible. We saw that early on with Cespedes batting second most days. Lately, it's been Brandon Nimmo at the leadoff spot. They like him there with Asdrubal Cabrera hitting second. Kevin Plawecki batting cleanup the other day was a weird one, but he was a right-handed batter, splitting up left-handed batters against a lefty. So he was there not so much because he profiled as a cleanup hitter in any real way as much as what side of the plate he batted from. So you're right. It has been a lot of different lineups from Callaway, but I don't really think that's the problem. I think lineup construction overall is kind of overrated, and nobody would really talk about it if the players would hit.
You brought up Cespedes. I saw he was running today. Did he take BP?
He's been taking BP for a while now. I don't know if he did it today, but today was a big step because he was running the bases, doing some fielding drills, doing more position-specific movements, things like playing left field, rounding the bases, things like that. So,
any indication if he was going to be in the lineup this weekend?
They are hopeful of that, but they hadn't decided whether or not he's going to need a rehab assignment. So, to be determined, I guess. I'd be surprised if they brought him back with no rehab assignment. Otherwise, it would kind of feel like they're rushing him,
Yeah, I just at this point, I feel like they just need a spark. I don't know where to go.
Well, that's the flip side, right?
Yeah.
I guess as bad as the Mets hitting has been, even if Cespedes is terrible, he can't pull the lineup down at all. But if you put him in there and something clicks, then who knows? Maybe he is that spark. So that would absolutely be the flip side, and they could go that route depending on how we feel.
Now, if the series was at Yankee Stadium, would it be more likely he would be in as a DH?
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Given that the fielding was one of the last hurdles, it would certainly be easier to ease him in at designated hitter over a couple of days. But unfortunately, NL baseball, I'm not exactly a fan of it, but pitchers hit.
Now, one thing I've also, at least if there's, I guess, a positive, or, which is very tough to find with the Mets right now in general, is the starting pitching has actually been a lot better. Wheeler,
it's been dominant.
Wheeler's pitched Wheeler had a great game today. DeGrom has been DeGrom, obviously. Even Vargas, although he's a 5-inning pitcher at this point, he's pitched a lot better than when he first started. My question becomes, do you see any type of a situation where they kind of swap out Vargas for Lugo and maybe move Vargas to the bullpen as more of like a long relief guy?
I think if they were going to do that, they would have done it this week or last week. It kind of looked like they were mulling that option, that after after Vargas' bad start in Milwaukee, assistant GM John Ricco said they were considering their options, and then Noah Syndergaard gets hurt, Lugo gets a spot start, so you start to think, okay, maybe Lugo will stretch out here. He got up to 4 innings. But then they got to look at the bullpen. They got a preview of what the bullpen would look like without Seth Lugo, and it was awful. So I think that sort of scared them away from that idea. He just becomes so valuable to that bullpen, really right out of the gate in April when he got his first couple of relief appearances under him. So, as long as Vargas can continue to be mediocre and not terrible, then I think that's a manageable fifth starter situation.
Okay, we're talking to Tim Healey here from Newsday on the Mets and what's going on over there in Flushing. You can follow him on Twitter at Tim B. Healey. He's a pretty good follow on Twitter. All these guys have a lot of fun on the Mets beat. We'll get into some of the Twitter stuff that you guys get into a little later. 3 guys, though, that Craig and I have been wondering about for over a month. Jose Reyes, Hansel Robles, and who is the third person that I'm thinking about? Can't think of him right now. But why? Oh, and Adrian Gonzalez. Why are these guys still on this team when you got guys like Peter Alonso that are raking in Double-A? And who cares? Bring them up to, again, they need a spark. They need something. And these guys have just been bad.
I totally hear you. Now, each of them obviously is a different situation, but to take them in the order that you mentioned,
yeah.
Reyes obviously is a huge target of fan angst right now, given that he's been super bad this year. And, as folks can read on Newsday.com right now, if they want to go check it out, the Mets have discussed releasing him. But given who he is and given his place in Mets history, being one of their best players ever, it is a little more sensitive than if it was just some random player they wanted to cut ties with, like Adrian Gonzalez. The Reyes thing is tough. I think the Mets would be better served by trying to figure out some way to keep him in the organization while keeping him off the roster, a la Ichiro and the Mariners.
Yeah.
Just give him some fake front office title and whatever. Let him go out with some pride, because the way he's been playing at the plate, in the field, he's not offering anything.
Do his teammates love him? Is he like a big part of the clubhouse?
I mean, he's a likable guy in the clubhouse for sure. He's always yucking it up, always hanging out with Ahmed Rosario and a lot of the other Latino players, but I don't think that's worth $2 million a year. Granted, they have to pay him that anyway, but I don't think it's worth the roster spot.
Right.
If he's that valuable, make him a coach or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then Robles, he's been. We've seen both extremes of Hansel Robles this year. We've seen the 3 shutout innings fresh off the DL, and then we've seen a bunch of home runs with him pointing to the sky on every one.
Chad loves that.
Right.
Chad's a big fan of that.
Oh, man. Oh.
So Robles is firmly on the Las Vegas, New York shuttle, obviously. He's been up and down all year.
Well, at least when they move to Syracuse, it'll just be the bus.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it'll be a lot easier logistically, that's for sure. But, I mean, he'll probably be up and down a couple of more times through the year, because what other options do they really have right now? We saw Garrison Bautista. He's, I like him on paper. If he throws hard, he only just turned 23. He could have a future, but right now he doesn't. He hasn't showed much in the major league level. Buddy Ballman didn't show much. He got DFA'd. Tim Peterson, he's another guy who could be on the shuttle, but he's had a pretty good showing in a handful of games that he's gotten into in his brief time with the team. So it's not like, with Hansel Robles' roster spot, low on the bullpen depth chart, it's not as if there's some obvious option that they could call up to replace him, which is, I guess, a good segue into the Gonzalez Alonso thing. You're right that Gonzalez hit a little bit of a productive streak there. I think it's around the beginning of May, but lately it seems like he's not even hitting the ball hard like he was earlier in the year.
Yeah.
And Alonso obviously is having a very good year at Double-A. His numbers are better than Michael Conforto's were in 2015 at the same level. Now, I understand the desire from fans, and I share in that desire. Just out of curiosity, what would happen if Alonso, they just plug him in, see what it looks like, see if he can hit, see if he can provide that spark. The flip side of that would be that his development as a player, as a prospect, shouldn't be rushed based on major league need. Ideally, in a vacuum, you can let a prospect just develop at his own pace. Let him mash in Double-A, maybe soon move him up to Triple-A. If you can kind of make the playing time work. Obviously, Dom Smith complicates things. So I get both sides of it. I don't think Alonso's a complete player. Talking to one scout who saw him recently, still holes in his swing. Defense is said to be not very good, although improved from past years. So he's far from a finished product, which is maybe why you don't hear too much solid buzz about him actually coming up to the majors.
Tim, I was reading just Andy Martino had a pretty good article today about Manny Machado and basically how while the Yankees, he's always been linked to the Yankees for a while, and maybe not so much now with his desire to only play shortstop and the fact that the Yankees are pretty loaded at every position in the infield.
Yeah.
Then he kind of made a mention that the Mets, there's no excuse why the Mets shouldn't make a run at Manny Machado. The thing is, what we've seen over the years with the Mets is it's always the same rinse and repeat where they just don't really go after the big fish when they probably should, at least try to get somebody that's a little bit more intimidating. And then it's always the same thing. They're always slashing payroll and everything. Why does it seem like this team just never has money, or they just never seem to have enough money to go after big-time free agents? Why does everything just seem so kind of planned and a little too calculated with the moves and everything, where between 2015 when they went to the World Series and 16 when they went to the wild card game, it's really mind-boggling why this team just never seems to have enough cash to be a big market team to go after big free agents.
Totally agreed. They've obviously got that reputation, and a deserved reputation as being a frugal team. Those questions, I think, are best served for Fred and Jeff Wilpon, and unfortunately, they don't make too many public appearances or too frequently speak with reporters, so it's unfortunate that they can't really express an answer. As far as, why the Mets don't have money, to me it's a question of whether they don't have money or whether they don't want to spend money. And I'll be honest, I don't know the answer there. Obviously, the Madoff thing a few years ago complicated the issue. I don't know where things stand now, but totally agreed with the Machado sentiment. He is the kind of guy that a big market team like the Mets, with plenty of room for him roster-wise, they should go after. I think a lot of times free agents are a bad investment. But when you have a guy like Machado who's going to be, 25, 26 when he's a free agent, even if you give him a long-term deal, which obviously he will merit, that's something that can transform a franchise. That's a brand new face of the franchise, an all-everything player. I would, however Ahmed Rosario's season goes, if Manny Machado was willing to be a Met, I'm sure they would make room for both. But I'm skeptical of whether the Mets will put forth that effort.
We're talking to Tim Healey, Mets beat writer for Newsday. Tim, Matt and I in the past, over the past couple of weeks, we've, when the Mets just continue to snowball and just crap the bed in general, we've always talked about the possibility of a Mets-Yankees trade, mostly pertaining around Jacob deGrom or Noah Syndergaard, being as though the Yankees have a bunch of prospects that could be expendable and guys that could probably slide into certain positions on the Mets right away, like guys like Clinton Frazier or Justice Sheffield or anything like that. Do you ever see a possibility of that happening?
I think it makes total sense on paper because the Yankees need an ace, and the Mets could certainly use an infusion of youth. But because it's the Yankees and Mets, I think it's a pipe dream to think that not only a trade coming to fruition, but a trade of that magnitude. I just don't see it happening. They talked last year about Neil Walker, about Jay Bruce, and couldn't come to terms on those bit players who were 2-month rentals. And so I can't imagine they come together on a deal for one of the best pitchers in baseball who has 2.5 years of team control left. But I totally hear you, guys like Frazier, Sheffield, Andujar, Torres, whoever would be in that theoretical deal, and the Mets should absolutely shoot high if the phone starts to ring there. I just don't see it being realistic given the environment, the atmosphere with the Mets and Yankees. in the feelings of both parties.
With everything going on right now with the Mets, there's a lot of finger pointing on who to blame. Who's really the primary culprit right now? Is it really Alderson because he didn't really put a good roster together this year? Or is it more Callaway for a lot of just kind of the decision-making, the bullpen being already tired, burnt out with starters barely going 5 innings, and then the fact the other day where he said that he felt that the players were succumbing to the pressure of playing in New York?
I think of those two, I would pin it more on Alderson for the depth of Alderson in the front office for the depth of the organization and the roster construction. Callaway has made some interesting and confusing moves on the field and comments to the press, but I think both of those things are vastly overrated in terms of how the team is actually performing. There was a stretch there, Milwaukee, Atlanta, that road trip where whatever button he pushed in the bullpen, the whole thing seemed to blow up on him.
That's
so
true. Yeah.
I can't so much blame Callaway for that. He's only playing with the cards he was handed. I think Callaway can be a really good manager. I think he's still getting his feet under him a little bit. But in the question of who to quote-unquote blame for this stretch or how the season has gone, the Mets' lack of depth has spoken speaks volumes about where they're at as an organization right now. That said, if you put the question to me as Alderson versus ownership, that's another question where the line starts to blur. Did Sandy Alderson do a bad job making this team, or did he try to do what he could with what the ownership would let him do? You know what I mean? That's a much more complicated question than field stuff versus front office stuff.
Okay, one other question for me, and that is I brought this up on on one of our shows, I think last week, and I basically said that if the Mets – well, actually, first of all, 2 things. One, how long before the Mets decide that they're going to be sellers, and do they really have the assets to at least acquire maybe some good players at the deadline?
I don't it's really hard to say if they're going to be sellers this year because there's almost 2 months to go. There's probably a month plus to go before they even have to make a decision, and then several weeks more until they get to the trade deadline. So if they continue to lose most of the time and be a terrible team, then yeah, they're going to need to be sellers. If they do become sellers, then they have a few interesting pieces. As Drupal Cabrera, who's going to be free agent, Jerry's Familia, A.J. Ramos and Blevins don't have much trade value right now, but they're 2 other guys who are going to be free agents at the end of the year. You even think about a guy like Todd Frazier, who's got a year and a half left on his deal. I'm sure there would be interest in several of the pieces, and that's not even to mention guys like DeGrom and Syndergaard, which are much more of a long shot and reasonably so, but there would certainly be interest in several Mets players should the Mets decide to go that route.
Did they confirm Syndergaard for Sunday?
That's the plan right now. He's still got to go, if they treated Tuesday as a quote-unquote start day when he had that brief simulated game,
right?
He's going to have to throw his normal bullpen session like he would between starts. That's going to be Friday, 2 days from now, Friday, and then he'll start Sunday night against the Yankees.
So I was saying before on a show last week, I think Chad was here. I think it was just me and Chad doing it. I made a prediction that basically if the Mets were out of it by September and the call-up start for September, I made a prediction that one guy that will most likely get called up is Tim Tebow.
I could see that.
Do you see that happening in just an attempt to sell tickets to close out the year?
I can definitely see it happening as long as Tim Tebow plays to a degree that makes it something that helps it not be a complete farce, right? So
right.
A couple weeks ago, I wrote a story for Newsday about Tim Tebow, and the gist of it was, wow, Tim Tebow's actually having a pretty good season. Mm-hmm. It was AA is his highest level of competition yet, and he was playing much better than he did in the low A in the first half last year. If the Mets follow the same pattern, then they will promote him to Las Vegas for the second half of this season. And Tebow, when I spoke to him, pointed specifically to the second half of this season as a critical test or critical portion of this experiment that he and the Mets are conducting, in terms of finding out whether he's going to be a major leaguer. So I absolutely can see that as long as Tebow plays reasonably well. He's made strides in Double-A, still striking out way too much, but if they do bump him up to Las Vegas, which is a very hitter-friendly place in a hitter-friendly league, the PCL, then he might be able to put up some pretty solid numbers and justify a call-up, not necessarily in a vacuum because he's not a true prospect busting down the door, but justify a call-up in terms of the spectacle of it all. And as far as the Mets' bottom line is concerned, justify a call-up for the ticket sales, which obviously would be boosted.
And we could put it towards the Manny Machado fund.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Maybe when the Mets make the announcement, if they put it that way, I'm sure it'll go over a lot better.
Just have a bunch of the workers with jars out for the Manny Machado fund for Tebow to come here. I mean, that's what it's really come to, and I keep saying it. I just it keeps going through my mind as the Mets. If the Mets, now look, the Mets could make a run. It's always possible, but I also kind of said if the Mets are out of it, it just seems so Mets-like to put Tim Tebow on this roster in September.
Definitely.
Tim, thanks a lot, man. Great job as always. Really appreciate you coming on.
One more from me.
Oh, wait.
One more from me, Tim. You're according to your Twitter, like I said, I'm big fan of your Twitter, at Tim B. Healey. You're a Chipotle guy. What's your order?
Yeah. My order?
Yeah.
That's funny because that's one of my go-to questions when I'm doing Q&As with players. But my order is a bowl for here with a tortilla on the side, brown rice, black beans, chicken, no salsa, corn and sour cream, and cheese.
Wow.
And
Tortilla on the side. I like that.
Water cup. Yeah, tortilla on the side.
That's a pro move right there.
It's just more food.
Yeah, I like that. Good stuff.
Tim, man, we really appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks a lot. Again, great job as always with all your stuff. We love reading your work. And hopefully, man, we'll talk to you again soon. All right?
Great.
Thanks,
Thank
Tim.
you guys very much.
All right.
All right, bye.
All right. That was Tim Healey, Mets beat writer for Newsday. Please check out his stuff on the Mets. It is great. It is a great read. Chad, what's his Twitter handle?
At Tim B. Healey. Healey is Healey.
So for Mets info and Chipotle orders, that's the way to go, man.